We now proceed to the session 2 of the conference, which is the spirit and message of Bandung. We now invite our session chair, along with our distinguished panelist, JavedJabbar Sahab, Dr. Ahmad Rizky, Dr. Jacovina, and Dr. Syed Akbar Zaidi. Please join us on the stage. Let me introduce the chair of the session. JavedJabbar Sahab is a versatile personality. He has distinguished achievements in diverse fields, please sir, including writing, filmmaking, media, voluntary service, education, environment, as well as national and global affairs. He has received several national and international honors, including the Civil Award Hilal-e-Imtiaz for literature. He is also associated with public diplomacy in South Asia for over 40 years, including Pakistan-India Track 2 Dialogue and Media Cooperation. Elected to the Senate of Pakistan for 6 years, he has served in 3 federal cabinets, holding the portfolios of information and broadcasting, science and technology, petroleum and natural resources, and national affairs. Over to you, Chair.
Right under my nose, and I didn't realize it. Like I don't realize so many things. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Thank you very much, Dr. Masuma Hasan, for affording me this privilege. It is an honor to be here at this year's conference in particular. One has benefited by attending, participating as a member of PIIA. One has had the opportunity to learn so much. From the days of the University of Karachi, one's education continues. And I'm privileged to also have to my left and right 3 very individually distinct personalities whose presentations will follow, as I am indeed to be part of this gathering here. But what a good beginning this has been. While one appreciates the valuable support of the government of Sindh for the holding of this conference, one has missed Murad Ali Shah because of unavoidable reasons, but without detracting from his Hussain Sayed, following on Dr. Masuma Hasan's very relevant identification of the nexus between PIIA and Bandung, and her esteemed father, Senator Mushahid Hussain, very ably set out not only his personal association with the home of the Bandung spirit and substance, his special relationship with Indonesia, but also referred to the 3 aspects brought out by events in the last 72 to 100 hours, followed by this very far-ranging, interesting, provocative address by Senator Sherry Rehman. Thought-provoking, but also provocative. Provocative in terms of obliging you to think of the connection that we sometimes overlook between what is happening to our world in terms of what we are doing to it, and the political concepts of reconciliation, conflict resolution, which have historically tended to be seen in isolation to what we are doing to the planet. So that synthesis was most appropriate. And now in this session we are looking at the spirit and the substance of Bandung, the spirit and the message of Bandung. One is tempted to ask, along with the message that seems to have changed and been distorted, does the spirit also survive, or not also, but does the spirit survive ethereally somewhere in higher space as if it cannot be touched, because those were the noble original intentions of Bandung? Or are spirits also mortal in the sense that they also react to the harsh realities in which that spirit has to be implemented or applied? So when we say the spirit of Bandung, uh, with great respect, the spirit of Bandung, Bandung, hey, Bandung and Bandung, what a big difference it can make, the dung and the doom, huh? No, absolutely. Thank you for correcting me. Next time Mushahid and Sherry speak, I'm going to sit right there and keep correcting them when they wander out track. Just to settle scores, just to settle scores. No, but thank you. Thank you very much. Because I must get the pet G also right. The pet G, the pet G, pet G is petty. You know what the petty is? The great headdress of the people of Indonesia, which Mr. Sukarno adopted in 1921 because he felt that this headgear should become the unifying symbol for the struggle for independence against the Dutch. Petty. I should have worn a petty today. But in this session, we have three very different perspectives. Absolutely. Thank you. Three very different perspectives, and look forward to that. I'm not going to inflict my unprecious thoughts on you at this stage. Much more important, it is to listen to these three wise persons. Very unfortunate that this session is grossly gender imbalanced, but perhaps following on Sherry Rehman, she more than made up for that by being a very powerful communicator. So us poor men will have to make sure that us poor men present our perspectives with equal credibility and fluence. And I was going to say 15 minutes. 15 minutes for each presentation. And may I now request Dr. Ahmad Rizky Umar, who is the Mari Sklodowska-Curie Fellow at the Department of International Politics at the Aberystwyth University, Wales in the United Kingdom. And his introduction is listed in the program brochure. 15 minutes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Senator JavedJabbar, for introducing me, and I would like to convey my thanks to Pakistan Institute of International Affairs for inviting me to these sessions. So my name is Umar, and I'm from Indonesia, and as Senator Hussain has mentioned before, Indonesia hosted the Bandung Conference in 1955. So the idea of the Bandung Conference itself was actually conveyed by Prime Minister Ali Sosro Amijoyo, or former Prime Minister of Indonesia, under the auspices of President Sukarno in Colombo Conference in 1954. The conference itself is not only about organizing a conference that is uniting the Asian and African countries, but it is also a conference, the first intercontinental conference, that was organized after the Second World War. As we have known before, the Second World War had not only had a devastating impacts for the world, especially in Europe and also in Asia, but also it created opportunities for many countries in Asia and Africa to obtain their self-determinations and obtain their independence in world politics. So this is the spirit of the colonizations. The idea that every countries, every peoples in the world has an inalienable rights for self-determinations. This is the spirit that constitutes the core of the Bandung Conference. And having said that, another important aspect of the Bandung Conference is also a spirit for every country countries in the world to be having sovereign equality. The equality between all countries, regardless if they're small or big countries. So this is the idea of having a decolonial world, having a world free of colonialism, and having a world where all countries can sit together and peacefully coexist. That becomes the core of the Bandung Conference. And the Bandung Conference itself is not only a single conference that originating the whole ideas of self-determinations. In 1928, in 1919, for example, there was the first moment where the idea of self-determination was actually introduced in Paris. However, this idea was not including many countries in Asia and Africa because Asia and Africa was not considered originally as having enough civilizations, having enough state of development to become a country. And this is the whole ideas of self-determination that the Bandung Conference actually reject. In 1955, the Bandung Conference put forward a basic idea of self-determination that does not requisite and does not presuppose the idea of a standard of civilization in order to become independent. As long as the peoples have said, have determined themselves to become independent, then this is the idea of self-determination that was become important. And one of the key events that becomes the basis for the organization of the Bandung Conference was the Indonesian questions in 1945 until 1949. Indonesia was the very first country who declared independence after the end of the Second World War. So after the surrender of Japan in 1945, and there are a vacuum of power that the Dutch colonizers wants to fill in. It is the moment of independence that laid out the groundwork for the Bandung Conference, and the Indonesian question was one of the very first case, one of the very first resolutions provided by the UN Security Council to be resolved. And this laid the groundwork for having the idea that every country in the world, every people in the world should be able to freely determine itself. So one of the key moments here, and this is something that makes the idea of the decolonization and radical equality, was also the solidarity between the countries in the world, the independent countries in the world, with all other countries. It is not only connecting the countries in Asia and Africa, but also the connection between countries who has been independent, who has been able to obtain the independence, and those countries who aspire to become independent but was under threat of attacks. This was the case of the Bandung Conference. So this was the case of the Indonesian questions. They led to this kind of solidarity. And in 1947, many countries in the world are having solidarity. At the time, Egypt was among the first country in the world to recognize Indonesia's independence, along with Ukraine, and also the Soviet Union in 1947, 46, who brought the case of Indonesia to the United Nations. And one of the key moments that precedes this question was also the 1947 Delhi Conference, the Asian Relations Conference, in which many Muslim countries and also many countries, many Asian countries in the world, many Asian countries came to Delhi and then met some leaders. And I think this was the moment where one of Indonesian delegates, the former Prime Minister Agus Salim, met with some Muslim delegates during this moment that precedes the partitions between India and Pakistan. So this is the moment of solidarity that made possible the Bandung conference. And if we take a look at the documents in the Bandung conference, one of the key documents that became the basis for the conference was also the Bandung stance principles. And I believe this is something, some of these ideas, especially non-intervention and non-aggressions from countries, was actually put forward at the conference by former Pakistan Prime Minister Muhammad Ali Bogra, who has made the speech at the opening ceremony of the Bandung conference to denounce the use of force, the illegal use of force, and put forward the idea of a non-intervention, that no country should be illegally use force to provoke other countries. And this is the contributions that make the Bandung spirit alive. And Bandung conference did not stop only at the conference itself. There are many events that made that followed the Bandung conference after 1955, and this is something that made possible not only the solidarity between Asian and African countries, but also made possible the independence of countries in Asia, Africa, and also in the Caribbean and the Pacific. So this is the key moments in the UN General Assembly debate in 1960. President Sukarno made a very historic and important speech that colonialism was evil and colonialism should be abandoned. With the support from many other countries, especially from Pakistan, this support was materialized into the UN General Assembly Resolutions 1514, which was becoming the framework, the key framework to make possible the independence of countries in Africa and also in other countries in Asia. And 60% of the new countries in the world was actually made possible to this UN General Assembly resolutions. And this is the one of the key outcomes that make the Bandung Conference important in world politics. Also, it's not only about sovereignty, and it's not only about sovereignty and self-determination. It's also about economic justice. And in 1974, for example, we had the new international economic order. The international economic order should not only be based on the interests of the Western countries or developed industrial countries, but also it should be based on the idea that every country in the world should be able to develop themselves. Now, we had a debate about climate change, for example, that was mentioned by Senator Sherry Rehman. The idea that of the climate, resolving climate change is not only about resolving the causes of the climate change itself, but also the proposed climate justice. The idea that the Bandung Conference that was materialized into the new international economic order was based on the idea that every country in the world should be equally able to develop themselves and to prevent themselves from being harmed, including from the harm of climate change. If we talk about climate change, it's not about the climate change itself that becomes a core concern, but also the victims, the poor countries, the countries that has inevitable positions to be impacted by climate change in Pacific, for example, would be the most important victim of the climate change, and it's not the industrial world. So this is the idea of the resolving the economic justice that is becoming the agenda for the Bandung conference. So I would like to conclude my presentation to reflect on what would be the agenda. Now, and as we have discussed before, the international order that we live Now, it's a very different order that was in the 1950s and in 1960s. So after the end of the Cold War, we had the liberal hegemony led by the United States. But it's no longer the case. It's not only the Western countries, and especially the United States, that create the agenda. There are many other countries who equally develop themselves and offer development partnership and cooperations. That is very different with the United States. And it is also, I think, the moment that the global South countries can utilize in order to bring about not only about the global economic justice, but also to pursue their aspirations for development. And also, as Senator Hussain has mentioned, and also Senator Sherry Rehman mentioned before, we have the issue of the Palestine. That is still unresolved. The Palestine question, yeah, and it should be, the Palestine question was actually mentioned in the final communique of the Bandung Conference. It should be resolved at the Bandung Conference in 1955, after the 1955, but it still has the same problem. This is the unfinished agenda of the Bandung Conference that we still see today. And also with the new rounds of tariff from the United States, which is totally unjust, and it totally does not reflect the interests of the global South countries. So what should be done? And I'm speaking here from the perspective of an Indonesian scholar. We need a new spirit of Bandung that reflects the challenge and responds to the challenge of the current international order. We need a global economic justice that is not only a justice for some countries, but also a justice for all countries from the new harms that threatens global economic order, from the climate change, from the trade and finance, and also from the issues of development. And this is also important to revive the spirit of sovereignty and equal sovereignty. We can see that in the United Nations, there are a group of countries who actually rules the world with their unequal power and authority. And as former Indonesia's Prime Minister Retno Marsudi has repeatedly mentioned in the UN General Assembly, we need a new global economic order that overhauls this kind of the economic injustice. So I would like to conclude these presentations by envisioning the youth Bandung spirit for the 21st century based on three principles. The first is a just economic order, the equal global economic order, and also the global political order, and a fairness that benefits all countries, not only in the global north, but also in other countries in the south. And thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Comprehensive presentation. And I would like to invite on realizing the Bandung vision in the 21st century, Dr. Jakovina, Professor, the Department of History in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Zagreb, Croatia. Welcome. And you have 15 to 17.
Thank you very much. Madam Masuma Hasan, dear guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I was in Bandung almost 10 years ago, and I gave a lecture there in the Palace of African and Asian Nations entitled The Non-Aligned from Bandung to Belgrade. The non-aligned countries movement is very often connected, maybe not always for good reasons, with the first conference of African and Asian countries in Bandung. As you all know, there were plans to organize Bandung II in 1965 in Algeria, the event that never took place. So Bandung therefore remained the only and unique event in the history of the Cold War, or post-Cold world, if you wish. But there was something else with the non-alignment, and non-aligned countries, in a way, have included very many of the ideas, of the principles, of the 10 principles that were accepted in Bandung. And for that reason, I would say, if you would take most of the best history textbooks and books on the Cold War, you would find that Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito, or Marshal Tito, is very often quoted or mentioned in the context of Bandung, although Yugoslavia was not there. It was represented at the level of the ambassador and several journalists that were in Bandung. But because Tito and Yugoslavia became so much a synonym of the non-aligned, that's why you have probably me here too, and that's why these two events are very much interconnected. So there were two processes that were going in parallel, I would say. One, by the Colombo 5 countries that were mentioned here, the Indonesian Prime Minister, who took on Bali in 1954, was asked by the President Sukarno to see whether there is a possibility to organize a conference. And then the other meeting in 1954, at beginning of 55, prior to Bandung. But also in 1954 and in 1955, so exactly 70 years ago, the first ever European statesman came by his ship Galeb from the port in what is Croatia today to Mumbai, and was the first ever European statesman to enter India through the gates that were built by the Empress, or in honor of the Empress Victoria in Bombay. And Tito was the first ever statesman to give a speech to the joint assembly of the Indian Parliament, went to Myanmar, Burma at that time, and then returned after his almost 2 months in Southern Asia back to Yugoslavia, changed. He was a changed man. And he was a changed man because he was able to confirm something that two of his first ever ambassadors posted in 2 countries, one in New Delhi and the other one in Cairo, in Egypt, and that they changed and they switched. And both of them were reporting that ideas that might be similar to the Yugoslavia resonate very well in this part of the world. So Tito remained changed. Tito returned changed to Yugoslavia at the beginning of 1955, exactly 70 years ago, prior to Bandung. That was a big change. I, preparing for this conference, have seen some of our newspapers in 1947 when this country became an independent country. It was reported with a couple of words, really. They were talking about the people killed in Lahore upon the proclamation of the independence, but not much more. In 1955, our newspapers were packed with articles dealing with the Bandung and the whole idea. And Yugoslavia, at that time, a socialist country, but not being part of the Russian or the Soviet world, a country that split with the Soviets in 1948. Now, some would say that was our decolonization. Although it's a little bit different, because Yugoslavia was the only country not only in our part of Europe that liberated itself alone, fighting against the Germans or the Nazis. And then in 1948 there was a split with the Soviets, and Yugoslavia remained alone, remaining socialist, but being supported by the West. In 1953, after Stalin died, Yugoslavia managed to re-establish relations with the Soviets, but not returning to the Soviet camp. Even more, Yugoslavia signed the so-called Balkan Pact with 2 NATO countries, Greece, and Turkey. And that was all unique. And that was something that other statesmen around the world, Nasser, for instance, were looking at. How to remain on your own, how not to be forced to accept the ideas that are coming from the West. In this case, or in Asian case, both ideas or both predominant ideas of the liberal capitalism or of the socialism were Western ideas, be it Marxist or of Adam Smith, regardless, you know. And that was something that Yugoslav leader managed to achieve. And that was something that Nasser mentioned when Tito, on his way to India and Burma, passed through Egypt and was the first one to meet with Nasser, who just recently became the head of the Egyptian state and becoming Tito's best friend on the international scene. So all those ideas that were stressed in Bandung, the 10 principles, they were partially mentioned here, and a special position of one European country that many countries around the world could maybe copy in certain ways, see that there are things that could be applied in their own situations. I would say benefited or were instrumental in foundation of the non-aligned movement. So Bandung was not a gathering of countries that were non-aligned. Maybe Indonesia and India and Burma at that time were more non-aligned than definitely China or Japan. Neither Pakistan was non-aligned in that sense, being much closer to the United States than was India, for instance. But what Yugoslavia and what Yugoslav input was, I would say, was that these ideas that were accepted in Bandung were not necessarily only ideas for Asian and African countries. They should be global, and that was what Yugoslavia said. So yes, but decolonizations, there are different types of decolonization. Even the Pakistani and the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka in Bandung were insisting on the point 6 of the 10 points accepted in Bandung, not mentioning any country by name, but telling on the margins of the conference, if we are going to accuse the French of being colonizing power, then we should not forget the Soviets in Eastern Europe. And that was something that worked for Yugoslavia, I would say. So also the context of the time, maybe I should have mentioned that earlier, was also good. Not only that there was a change in the Soviet Union, but the French were defeated by 1954. So there were different reasons why Bandung came at the right time, I would say, for many of the countries there. In 1956, two leading participants in Bandung, Nehru and Nasser, met with Tito on the Brioni Islands in Yugoslavia in 1956. And in 1960, in the light of the U2 incident, 5 leaders, the so-called Big Five of the non-aligned, met in the Yugoslav mission in New York. Tito, Nehru, Nasser, Sukarno, and Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, also to send a message to the world. The ideas they proposed to the United Nations General Assembly were not accepted, but what the message was, hey, you cannot talk in the light of U2 incident and the fight between the East and the West, or the Soviets and the Americans, about the world, and totally disregard the majority of the population that live in these countries that are not tackled, not asked. You know. In 1961, Tito made his 72 days long journey around Africa, becoming the first ever, again, statesman to visit Ghana, Togo, Liberia, Guinea, Morocco, and then finishing in Egypt again, with already an idea to meet and to convey a conference, which was eventually held in Belgrade in September of 1961, and that was the beginning of a movement that still exists. Maybe it's not very active, but it's still around. It still has conferences, the movement of the non-aligned countries, where majority of ideas from Bandung and majority of the participants, or very many of the participants from Bandung, were participating. As you know, probably Pakistan joined in 1979. It took them quite some time, but for the reasons you should ask in Delhi, I would say, not among the other other countries that were members of the non-aligned. Now, I'm a Cold War historian. This sounds like long gone history, something that might seem impressive because of the leaders that existed at that time, and in this age of the crisis when it comes to the leadership, that might be also something to talk about. But the world has not only dramatically changed after, especially in the European context, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The world, from the perspective of the Western historians or scholars, was passing through two great, or how the French have a name of 30 fat years, you know, after the Second World War and then after the 1990s. So maybe that doesn't apply to all countries equally, of course. Definitely not for my country, which was at war at the beginning of the 90s, so we caught some of these fat 30 years, but a little bit later than the others. Now you have the end of that era and the end of that period. And with the new president in the United States, that's definitely something that we should talk about as historians more than political scientists, I would say. Now, I will just quote something that the world that became, and I will give you two quotations. The world that became too narrow or impossible for neutral countries, and maybe non-aligned countries too. The Swiss banker Odier recently said that Switzerland cannot hide itself behind the abstract concept of neutrality that refuses to view reality as it is. But the Finnish president, the current Finnish president, recently, before President Trump came into power, said that the world is at the turning point, that it has to decide between the Yalta and the concept of divided world, and Helsinki of 1975, also around the anniversary when the countries, United States, Soviet Union, Canada, and European countries met at the Conference of European Security and European Security Conference. And the Finnish President Stubb said, well, from our perspective, coming from a small state, it is very important that we do not limit the sovereign right of countries to decide its future. And then finally, the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was a little bit more realistic, I would say. I'm not being entirely surprised. A multipolar world used to be our taking point. It's now become the American taking point. It's not the question of missing this or liking that. I got what I got. I'm a realist, he says. I do not conduct foreign policy by saying I wish it could have been this, or I wish we could go back, or I wish this did not happen. It happened. And I'm not saying everything before was entirely bad or entirely good. Many countries, many small countries, are a little bit afraid of the world we are now entering. Because, and I'm not talking only about small countries, but small countries in particular, the countries without globalism, global institutions, multipolarity, the world in which we are not going to pretend even that the United Nations are our joint organization, that we should work together. That world is not going to be a very comfortable place for very many small countries, be it very rich. Look at Denmark, for instance, and what's happening with Greenland and the territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark, especially smaller and weaker countries around the world. So it comes so far that even in Croatian newspapers, you had an article telling that maybe Europe now should become a leader of the third way, and that Europe should become a non-aligned power in the world where you have China on one side and the United States on the other side. However, in the spirit of Bandung, so the world has changed, and we have probably all our mechanisms we had and all the tools we used to talk about the soft power, to talk about the divisions and so on, United Nations, maybe that became obsolete now. However, we still live in a world where no country or a few countries can solve our refugee crisis, our climate crisis, problems with terrorism, inequality between South and West. All these problems that were problems tackled in different ways in Bandung 70 years ago, these issues are still with us. Maybe the climate change was not as obvious as it's today, but no country can solve it on its own, and we have to live together if we are going to survive. The lady before said that artificial intelligence might pose a threat to the humanity as a whole. All these are global problems. And how global they are, I'll finish with something maybe you are not aware of and definitely came as a surprise to all of us. During the COVID crisis, which was just yesterday, the face of my country, which is not one of the richest in European Union, and it's one of the smallest within European Union with not even 4 million people, became changed. It's a changed face. And I remember a Dutch ambassador who gave to give a speech to my students said, well, when I came, none of the workers on the construction sites were different than the majority of Croats. Now all of them are from somewhere else. Nepalese are the largest minority in Croatia. Yeah. They became a largest minority in Croatia over the past 4 years. We don't have the mechanism. We don't know how to make them citizens of Croatia yet, but they will soon come with their families, and the face of Croatia will change. Those are global problems. We are in the same boat, and these ideas were presented in Bandung. Now, I'm sorry I started with the crisis of leadership. I'm sorry that there aren't very many leaders in this world. And leaders sometimes can come from a small country, like Yugoslavia was, a people who recognized this common interest. At that time, 70 years ago, we were much further away than we are today, who came by boat, but realized, well, there are things that we could maybe do together, and we should strive together to change that world for the better of all of us, Yeah. With these words, I will wind this up.
Thank you. Again, you have introduced several elements that deserve consideration. Thank you, Dr. Yabuini. And now we request Dr. Akbar Zaidi, who will lead us into a new international economic order. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, Javed. Dr. Masuma Hasan, thank you for this invitation. In December last year, I received an email from Dr. Masuma Hasan asking me to come and speak at this conference and be part of a panel and talk about a theme which looks at, and the question that I was asked to look at is a new international economic order emerging? Remember, her email came from the United States. and this is well before the 100 days of Trump, which we are faced with these days. I'm not sure if Masuma was being prescient, and like a lot of people felt that 100 days after Trump was elected, we would be talking about the emergence of a new international economic order. Or like me, she was already clear about the fact that President Trump is not changing the new international economic order, but in fact, he is a product and consequence of that. The argument that I will make is that what we see in the world today is not the beginning of the new international economic order, but is a consequence of changes that have taken place in the last 10, 20 years. I think the previous speaker also mentioned a lot of these changes, things that have happened since. So a lot of people think that Trump is bringing about a new international economic order. I think that's not the case. The new international economic order has already been brought into play, and Trump is just a mere reflection of that, as are many other people and many of the problems that you highlighted. So the old new international economic order probably came into being after the First World War, but more sort of structurally and institutionally after the Second World War, and when it ended in 1945, when you have the beginnings of completely new international order, a new superpower emerges, becomes stronger, it existed earlier, and you have the beginnings of what later became known as the golden age of capitalism. You have at that time after 1945, a well-defined bipolar world with the Soviet Union on one side and United States and its Western allies on the other, and a China which does not even exist in the imagination of people, except that it's an evil world because it's got Chairman Mao and Zhou Enlai, as Mushahid has spoken about in the morning. So China was a complete footnote to what the world had emerged into after 1945. In fact, China became independent in the way that we see it today, much after 1945. You had a bipolar world at that time, clearly defined by the US, led by the US, with Europe being defended, supported, and rebuilt by the US, and a very large number of colonized countries. You had the beginnings of the United Nations, the World Bank, IMF, the Washington Consensus later on. You had a new international economic order, the Bretton Woods system, all being laid, entrenched in the economic system that existed. I think that was the new international economic order, which emerged before, during, soon after the Second World War. It's difficult to, these events or these processes, you can't put a date on them. There are processes after all. So from a very clearly defined bipolar world, today we are in a quattro polar world, a 4.5 polar world, a 3.5 polar world, or a multipolar world, however these words mean to you. From the two superpowers in the world today, we are down to, or we are up to maybe 4, 3, depending on your point of view. Certainly the United States, a crumbling, falling empire. Certainly China, a rising, this is the Chinese century for sure, the Chinese superpower rising and contesting every other upstart and real power in the world today. And then you have two spoilers. One is the European Union, which isn't clear about something that you said is very interesting. The European Union isn't clear about where it's going. And I think Trump has made it very clear for the European Union where it ought to go. And I think Trump should be congratulated for giving a wake-up call to the European Union that it's a different world now, and the US is not going to support you any longer. And the third one, and the third spoiler, fourth spoiler, is of course Russia, the superpower that it was and continues to be or pretends to be. I think that's also important. It's also populist authoritarianism, although without elections of the kind that we think about when we talk about populism, whether it's in Turkey, Pakistan, India or Brazil or the United States, the form of authoritarianism in the Soviet Union is very different. I also think, unlike these other countries, unlike China, unlike the United States, and of course, unlike Europe, which is very, very diverse, very fractured, but also unified, Russia has a big problem, is that it's run by one individual. And it's very, very centric to what Putin wants and how he wants to see Russia be in the world. After Putin, we don't know what happens, whether the Russian Empire crumbles. We've heard the story before and still survived for so many years. And then there are two small players, and when I say 4.5 polar world or 3.5, the two smaller players are India. I think India is a very important player in this region, obviously, as we heard from Sherry also a little while earlier. But I think also with its growing footprint, the Vice President of the United States and the presidents of every single corporation end up in India before they go to other countries in the world. At a small private marriage, not small, $600 million marriage ceremony, I think, I don't know when it was, sometime in August or February last year. The global corporates turn up from Musk to Tusk to Zuckerman to everybody. The entire Hollywood celebrities show up. This is the power of India. We should not, despite our problems with India, we need to recognize that India is not merely a South Asian country, it's a growing economic, social, cultural power as well. And the other half, the quarter, that's the quarter, the other quarter would be Saudi Arabia and Israel. I think the Middle East, the new Middle East that is emerging. And I think Saudi Arabia and Israel are part of the same coin. They belong to the same family of United States capitalism. Otherwise, the Palestine problem would have been solved decades ago. The only impediment is not the United States, it's not Israel, it's Saudi Arabia. I think, and we need to realize why that is the case, because a free Palestine would destabilize, would make a progressive, although I don't know what progressive means in the context of the Palestinians anymore, but would change the balance of power in the Middle East. So then you have, I don't know what to call it, a multipolar world or a quadrupolar world, but you have a polar world which is fractious, where you have emerging powers, you have competing powers, and you have powers which presume or aspirational powers. I think that's a good term. You have aspirational powers like Saudi Arabia and Israel, and like India, who want to be in a sphere of influence, and they already are. It's very clear how the clout that Israel has in the Middle East, the way it can destroy Jordan's, Syria, Lebanon, and of course Gaza. I'm not even going to talk about the way its planes can go without being stopped in the entire Middle East region, and how Saudi Arabia sits on the sidelines allowing this to happen. I think it's very difficult to say that in Pakistan, but I think it needs to be said that the problem that exists in the Middle East, in Gaza, are not only, and the cause is not only Israel. It goes well beyond that, and it doesn't have to go across the Atlantic to North America. I think it's in that region, and we need to think about this. So this is a different type of world, obviously a very, very different type of world which has emerged. And when you have politics of that nature, the economics that takes place will also be arising in the same way. We've seen the bluster from Trump in his day 1 to day, I don't know what day it is today, 105, 107, whatever day it is, and he's had to scale that down every single day. In the morning he makes one announcement, in the evening he cancels my last announcement. We talk about U-turns, and we've had enough of those in this country, but you look at the difference, and every other statement by Trump about economics is scaled down from having tariffs of 35%, 100%, or whatever percent. He's had to go back to just a mere 10%, and that too after Canada, Mexico, and other countries have said no, we don't accept this tariff of 10%. We want a different sort of scale with them. And this presumptiveness about China and having tariffs of 145%, and the last 3 days he's been trying to figure out how he's going to scale them down. I have no idea what percent they're going to be, because with tariffs for China means that the end of American, not the beginning, not make America great again, but make America dead again. It's going to be the end of the end of any hope, not in a real sense, but the end of any hope which Trump and MAGA and other people are hoping to make America great in any way. You cannot avoid China. You cannot put, and you can't avoid the United States either. But I think this desire to show that you are a bigger bully than the economic clout of China has already come back to hurt the United States. So that's the world that we are living in. The new international economic order is about different spheres of influence. It's changed from a very clear capitalist or communist world, or alleged communist, or an aspiring or hopeful communist world as it existed in the 1950s, 1940s, 60s. And I'll come to Bandung in the end when I speak about it and see how that fits into this. But that was a world, a very different world, a very different economic order, a very different political order, a different order of might, which has now been fractured. I think we're living in a very fractured world where power is being evolved, used up, migrated in every sense, including in the way that you said. If you go, as any of you know, you go to Europe, you see more brown people there than white people. That's a consequence of colonization, and it's now payback in some ways. The 200 years or the 100 years of colonization have now come home to roost in a way, which is a very unexpected way. I mean, I personally would not have seen, not have expected Europe the way it has evolved in the last 10 years, and the politics that is playing out with the rise of populism and right-wing populism. So, coming back to Bandung, where does the spirit of Bandung lie? I think 1955, there was far more hope than there is today. The spirit of Bandung has collapsed completely. There is no spirit at all. There's just a matam that we're doing. This is a eulogy for an idea, for a moment, for a hope, which it took place in April 1955. We are gathered here, hum sog manane baithe hain. We gathered here to look back at 1955, where there was hope, there was a possibility, and this is despite the fact that decolonization had not taken place. Independence for a large number of countries, many were free much after that in the 1960s. In Africa, many of we still had apartheid. Many of the countries, as I think one of the speakers said earlier, Palestine, which was discussed in 1955, is still not free. But I think we have completely washed and lost whatever hope the spirit of Bandung had. And now, with the possibility of having a non-aligned movement which lasted a short while, we don't even call these countries the third world. And I think that is very unfortunate. I think there is a sense of pride in being called and dismissed as being part of the third world than being called the global south. I think this idea of a global south and global north works well when we think about climate change and the interdependency of the world. But I think in political terms, in trying to look at issues of colonization, decolonization, independence, I'm happier being called a third world person, a third world country, first world living in the third world, third world of course, but third world, part of the third world. I think this global south, and I think as somebody said, I think you spoke about global south and west, which is interesting. You didn't say the global south and north, but I think that's where the world has come to. From a powerful moment in 1955 with hope of decolonization, independence, and a new international economic order, as both the speakers have said today, we're in a world where there is no economic order of any sort. There is certainly no decolonization at all. And I think Sherry spoke about decolonizing our minds, a very important concept. I mean, something that is completely lost on us. It's not just about the iPhones and the money and the aid that comes or doesn't come. It's much more in how our thinking has not evolved or evolved in a very different way. So I'll stop here and say that this is hum matam mana rahe hain, ya pata nahi manate hain ya kar rahe hain, sog mana rahe hain. Bandung 1955 was a moment of hope, a possibility of a different social, economic, political order to evolve. And I think sadly, where we are today is a very different world than many of us, perhaps any of us, could have imagined. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gulzari, for ending on such a cheerful note. Even more provocative. Excellent, very good. We've got three very lucid presentations, and we go in for responses, comments, questions. We started a little late, but please go ahead. Please do identify yourself and kindly be precise and put it in the form of a question. Thank you. Please go ahead. Identify yourself. You are audible if you speak a little, speak up a little. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, mic if you can. Yeah. Yes, please go ahead. For Akbar Zaidi, yes, please.
Sir, my question is to Dr. Akbar Zaidi.
Yes.
Dr. Zaidi, you observed that this is the Chinese century. No doubt China is a strong economy. But don't you think that Chinese success story has been made possible due to an authoritarian system?
Okay. Thank you.
Sir,
Yeah,
I'm just,
thank you.
there's another question as well. Number one. Number two. Sir, what outlook do you see for Chinese economy after Trump administration's imposition of 125% tariffs on Chinese imports? So these are two questions.
Thank you.
Sir.
I'd like you to respond. Thank you.
I'd like you to identify which countries are not authoritarian to start with. If you look at, I think the United States, India, Turkey, much of Europe, parts of Europe, and China are all authoritarian in very different, Pakistan of course, are all authoritarian in very different ways. So I don't think that authoritarianism and what that means for a country, I mean, I think democracy is much better than any system that we can think of, and democracy often has led to authoritarianism, as we see in the populist wave around the world. So it's difficult to predict. As I said, when I ended, I said none of us here could have predicted or thought of how the world would evolve even 30 years ago. I think much of what's happened and happening and is going to happen over the next few years is something that we are not aware of because of conditions, interconnectedness, and that sort. I think this is going to be the century where China begins to dominate more forcefully the economic sphere, which it already does, but more forcefully. It does not have the military might at the moment, which the United States and the West does have, but it may develop those things over the next few years and under a process of authoritarianism. But I think that the problem with authoritarianism is not Chinese. It's not a Chinese problem anymore. It's now a global problem, and we see that if it's a problem, I mean that's something that people can debate about.
Thank you. Please, it's not fair. Two questions. Sorry, yet another question. Three. Sorry, you've already asked that. The tariffs question. You know, there will be sessions also after this. Thank you very much for your understanding. Yes, please identify yourself and then. Sorry, there was our friend from overseas. Please.
Yes.
Go ahead. No.
I'm Monjani, originally from Myanmar or Burma.
Yes.
Very happy to hear Burma mentioned a number of times as one of the organizers of Bandung conference, and I also conducted some activist workshop in Bandung myself with other Southeast Asians, activists and scholars. I want to take issues with the last speaker, Dr. Zaid's, rather bold declaration that Bandung spirit is dead. Maybe the form in which that spirit is being expressed around the world may have rendered it unrecognizable as Bandung spirit. But as a lifelong activist, I would strongly disagree.
Thank you.
with the pronouncement that Bandung spirit is dead.
Put a question in case you want to. Thank you very much for that
No,
valuable.
I want to give just one example on Palestine and also Rohingya. I'll be speaking about both genocides tomorrow. Now, I started out as a young activist at the age of 12, 14, community organizer. I'm 61, going into 62, and exiled for 37 years in US and UK. But I think I became more radical, meaning I became more interested in root causes. And Bandung spirit attempted to address the foundational causes of the crises of environment and our humanity at large. And I'm more radical today than I was when I was 12. I'm much more informed about the root causes today than when I was 12 and 24. And sir, I would now appreciate the declaration of the spirit of humans to fight for a better world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very, very encouraging to hear you say that. And I'm sure Akbar Zaidi will allow for the scope for Bandung to still survive somewhere or the other. It survives in your heart and in your mind. And that's very encouraging. Thank you. Any other comments before we move towards? Yes, please. Go ahead, right at the back.
Thank you, Chair. This is Sarfraz Correjo. I am life member of the Institute and from the Premier Public Sector University of Aberystwyth, Shah Abdul Latif University, Khairpur. My question is related to Dr. Akbar Zaidi, as he, on the basis of his vast experience being the political economist, he has mentioned and fixed the mood of the burden as the mourn, sog, matam or isme. And you know that we, the human being, have learnt always from the pains. No gain without pain. So what do you suggest that this mourn or matam could be reduced or overcome in future? Thank you.
I really have no idea. But I think that if we heard what Sherry had spoken about earlier, it was in response to some of the questions that, see, I think even Mushahid, when he spoke in the morning, he was more optimistic than anyone else here. But I think when Sherry spoke and the comments that I've made, I think it's important to think about and reflect. I mean, even sadness and sorrow can lead to different things as long as you understand. I mean, the gentleman who spoke about the spirit of Bandung, all power to you, and I hope there are others who are inspired by other events, similar events. I am unfortunately not inspired by Bandung because I think we've lost it, not because this wasn't a good cause. There's a difference here. In principle, as I said, it's an extraordinary cause because you're trying to decolonize a world which is not, which is still controlled by the colonial empire and so on and so forth. So as a principle, it's something very powerful, but there have been numerous other events which are also inspiring and which give rise. So to each their own. I think that it's important to reflect. Failure is not something that we should shy away from. It's important to reflect why a movement has failed, why an idea has failed, and sometimes things run out of time. And it's important to think about other possibilities, and to each their own, whether it's climate change, whether it's some other form of activism. I think it's important for us to be conscious citizens and involved in what's happening. And I think people have their own views about how to go about doing that.
Thank you. And I request Dr. Umar, yourself and Dr. Govin to make 2 minutes each concluding comments before the poor chair uses his opportunity
Thank you very much. And I think my concluding comments are, I think, in response to the several questions. I agree that we now have a different world order than the previous Bandung Conference in 1955. I, however, think that instead of thinking that the spirit of the Bandung Conference is no longer relevant, I think we need to think also about the current challenges of in global injustice that we think about. Even though the world order that we have today is a very different one than the 1955 Bandung Conference, the structure of global injustice is still here. We have the question of Palestine, we have the questions uh, of the global economic injustice in terms of trade, and we have now the tariffs, which is one way of from the developed countries to coerce the global south countries. I think this is now the momentum, rather than thinking about that Bandung conference, that this is now a momentum to craft new global south solidarity between all global south countries. And it is time to put aside the differences and think about our global origins as a southern country, as children of the colonizations. And I think this is one way to think about the relevance of the Bandung Conference in the 21st century. And thank you very much.
Yeah, probably my context is so much different, always coming primarily, I would say, from a very small country. So the way how I see a city with 20 million people as this one, and coming from, in the European context, not a small city of Zagreb with almost 1 million, but country with less than 4, you know. My world looks much different than your world, you know. And so I think that that will be one of the keys. There is a huge potential. Okay, you knew that there is a potential in very many people even 50 years ago, and it was not always used in the best way. But it's not only with Trump, it's not only with the changed overall system, but it's simply the world that is different than in 55. I mean, look at the number of people in Egypt and Indonesia and Pakistan then and today. It's a changed world, and we also see each other in a much different way. I said that Tito came by boat, you know. Today we take a phone and you see the other world, you see what's on the other side, and we are so interconnected that that world is different. I think that we have to preserve institutions of the multipolar world, that we have to preserve the global institutions, that we have to keep a world with institutions where small countries and large countries can talk on the equal footing and discuss on the equal footing. Because if we are going to be dominated just by the powerful and the rich, without even pretension that there is a possibility to speak up coming from a smaller countries, I think that world is going to be worse than not a very good world we lived before, until recently.
Thank you very much, all three of you, gentlemen, and thank you for your comments and questions and attention. In about 5 minutes, I'll try to conclude. I think going beyond Bandung, the world took 3 concepts as almost given, almost sacred. Democracy, for example, whether it is a one-party democracy, as is China, in a sense, China is the model of one-party democracy. It's a very merit-based democracy, non-competitive in terms of parties, non-pluralist, but it represents the will of the Chinese people. Or we went for robust multi-party democracies. But we went forward with democracy with electoral systems and structures largely inherited from the West. In the case of the British, the Westminster model, utterly non-representative in terms of majority opinion, and yet validated by the fact that they are members of legislatures. So what contradictions do we get? In Pakistan, for example, ruling parties barely ever get more than 15% of the vote. 50% don't even bother to vote. And in India, we have a very regular, stable, democratic process. But what does it produce? In the last election, 62% of the people of India voted against the BJP. Only 38% voted for the BJP. But today, It is in its third electoral term, because this sacrosanct system of Westminster parliamentary democracy suits the winners who don't need to get more than 5% of the vote or 15% of the vote. And democracy, historically, we have misrepresented, misunderstood as a Western concept. As partly the result of this whole conditioning by Western academia, democracy as if it is a gift that the industrial West gave to Asia and Africa. Historically, indigenous societies, tribal, even clan-based, even monarchies, all continents have had basic democratic impulses and systems. We haven't even discovered the depths of Mohenjo-daro. But Mohenjo-daro, Indus Valley civilization, our land, Pakistan's land, at a time when the pharaohs in Egypt were building themselves 30-foot-high statues of self-glorification. Here is Mohenjo-daro, a proletarian civilization. You don't find huge statues. You don't find big palaces for the elite. You truly have an egalitarian, accessible city. And we don't know what lies beneath. So democracy and the instruments of democracy that we have used has helped distort Bandung in many ways. Because I come to the second point, which is the nation state, the concept of the nation state, a relatively recent concept in terms of world history, barely 400 years old. And it's really developed and crystallized in the 20th century. And particularly after, let us say, the two world wars and the emergence of so many new nation states, which have also tried to model themselves on the pre-existing nation states. But the concept of the state itself needs to be questioned and challenged. The nature of the state is coercive. Of course, it says it has to be coercive because it is the only structure which is licensed and authorized to use violence. But how has the state used violence? The very countries that went to Bandung started a new form of colonialism, which was internal colonialism, where elites captured the instruments of state power and using it in the name of saving the nation state, colonized their own people. Not only with the baggage that the colonialists had left behind, but with a new sense of power, legitimized by freedom and independence. Not enough conceptual, intellectual research and reflection has gone into this by our own academia, unduly influenced by Western academia. How little we have exchanged with Chinese academia. We don't even speak the language of China, our greatest friend. We are so Western. And there's nothing wrong with the West. The West has many great gifts of freedom of speech, creativity, innovation, technology, all of that. Yes, but at the roots, there are some very unhealthy aspects to the Western concept of the world. There's racism, there's discrimination, masquerading as a new sense of democracy. And the third, my last conclusion is that the reason why we have deviated from Bandung is that even the developing countries, and I'm sorry to say even China, which is the only country that has retained political communism but has opened the doors to the market economy and is a fusion of both. But even the developing countries, while condemning the developed countries for inflicting climate change, are themselves trying to imitate the developed world. We are slaves to the market economy, enslaved by consumerism, a rapacious greed, driven by this mantra of growth, as if growth is the only paradigm, and not focusing enough on non-growth alternatives to economic progress. There can be economic progress without consumption-based growth, because no planet can sustain this kind of trajectory that we have adopted. Growth, growth, growth. And of course, with growth, Pakistan beats them all when it comes to making babies. We grow babies faster than we produce wealth and value, and one neutralizes the other. So I believe that if we want to revisit the principles of Bandung, we need to start reflecting on improving, refining the democratic structures that we have taken for granted. Whether we make voting compulsory, whether we make it compulsory for the winner to get at least 50% plus one vote to truly represent the majority. Most democracies are utterly non-representative. The second, we need to refine the state, to reduce the power of the state, to diffuse the power of the state, to make local communities empowered without introducing parochialism, sectarianism, tribalism, which we are also prone to do. And third, of course, trying to develop a new market model, whether it is the Tim Jackson option, which he talks about, there can be progress without growth. It's a long way away, but perhaps worth pursuing. But thank you for your patience, and lunch, I presume, is available. So I've only gone 4 minutes beyond 1 or 2 o'clock.
Thank you, Dr. Jabbar. Thank you all the esteemed panelists. It's been very enlightening session. We had very critical discussion earlier as well, and you didn't stand between the audience and lunch. So we are breaking for lunch now. Thank you very much.